just by the provider we happen to choose, or that files a tariff and starts providing the service, do we actually have the ability to review the options and say, you know, this is what will best meet our mission and will be produce better outcomes, not worse outcomes. Are there any questions? Jackie? How about if I just repeat her question?
There it is.
I just want to clarify, you are releasing this RFI through the PUC, or they cannot release it, so you're releasing it on your own, but the filings go through the PUC? I just want to clarify that.
No, the sponsoring 911 authorities will release it directly. In the instructions will request or require that respondents file a courtesy copy of their response to the RFI in the PUC docket. And that will just be to facilitate the availability of that information to everybody in the state.
You said that the PUC is considering, still considering a couple of workshops. Does that include the one on December 4th that's been scheduled?
The one on December 4th, as I understand, pertains to the outages and interruption to service from the floods. The workshops they're considering would be directed towards the next Gen 911 system configuration that we would like to proceed with.
Okay. Any other questions for Joe?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Well, I'd like to go ahead and get started with our main event. We do have, hey, there goes a microphone on the floor. We do have Senator Nicholson here. Senator Nicholson is the chair of the Senate Local Government Committee. I don't believe we have Representative Ryden or Fields here at this time, but hopefully when they get here they can join you. But I don't see any point in holding you up just to wait for the rest of the schedule. So basically, we asked several members of, or mostly chairs of the various committees that deal with issues concerning public safety and telecommunications to come and just tell us a little bit about what their committee does as it relates to public safety communications or telecommunications or public safety in general, and what their background is on those issues and what their philosophy is on those issues, and then we're going to have time for a little bit of question and answer at the end. And so I really thank the Senator for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you for a little bit.
Thank you. Before I was in the state Senate, I was a county commissioner, and I served on the 911 authority board. And before I was a county commissioner, I was a public health nurse, and it was a rural community, Gilpin County, that meant as the public health nurse, I just talked to myself because there wasn't anyone else. I was also responsible for emergency responses in terms of setting up shelters and providing the health services in those shelters should the need arise. So I am, I think, closely aligned with all of you and very much appreciate all of the work that you do, because I think that what you're doing is making our community safer and making sure that people get services as quickly as they possibly can, which makes perfect sense to me as a public health nurse, a county commissioner, and a senator. So let me tell you a little bit about where I'm from. I actually represent 4 counties, a lot of Jefferson County, some of Boulder County, some of Denver County, and all of Gilpin County. And I think that probably the main reason that I'm the chair of the local government committee is because I was a county commissioner before and understand local government issues a little better than some of my colleagues do. And I've served in that capacity for 2 sessions and served on the committee, but was not the chair the first year that I was in the Senate. And the responsibility of the local government committee at the state level is to look at any legislation that's being brought before the legislature to determine how that affects local government and how that, in my mind, benefits local government. And so it's always an interesting challenge because, as you know, this is a local control state, and I respect the reasons why we have local control in Colorado, but I also think there are times when we need to have statewide standards as well. As you can imagine, we'd be in complete chaos if we said each county can decide whether you want to drive on the right side of the road or the left side of the road. So there are times when I think we do need to have a statewide agreement. And there are other times when I think because of the uniqueness of each one of our communities, it's good that we have local control. And so I think just specific to the issues that you care about, we did, of course, talk about a voice over internet protocol bill that would say that that whole service was not to be regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. My position on that was, and still is, that 911 is a service, it's not a business, in the same sense that other kinds of businesses are, and for that reason, it should be regulated by the PUC. If somebody wants to have voice over internet protocol, that's fine with me, but the 911 portion of that has to be regulated by the PUC. What I saw as a county commissioner was some challenges that I think all of us have because we have separate 911 authorities and they can provide or purchase services from different companies. So the services can be different from county to county, even though many of the serious problems that we deal with and that you directly deal with really don't care about county lines. When you're dealing with a flood that we just recently experienced or wildfires, those certainly don't respect county lines, and for that reason I worry sometimes that we don't have some centralized kinds of services. So I'd be interested in your thoughts because you're really on the front line, many of you, in terms of providing the service. I'd be interested in your thoughts about whether or not there might be some standard, basic standards that we might want to have statewide, in addition to allowing for local control, accommodating for unique circumstances in each community. And I think also that we need to look at whether we have the right legislation in place in terms of how much we charge for phone calls. I know that it's a part of your phone bill because I was on the 911 authority board, otherwise I wouldn't know that. And we talked about that a lot, on the board. How much should it be? Should it be 50 cents or 70 cents a month, or what should be the rate be? And my understanding is that the statute right now is kind of locked in and isn't adjusted for inflation, so we may want to revisit that issue as well, just to make sure that we understand that we are paying for a very valuable service, what that service is, and how much it costs, and why we might need to increase the amount of money that's available in order to provide that service. And in addition to that, I only have one more point that I want to make before I turn it over for questions, and maybe my colleagues will join me in just a few minutes. I think we all thought 1 o'clock, but you said lunch, so I came early for lunch. And forgive me for not being formally dressed too. I was appointed to the Flood Recovery Committee representing the legislature, so we've been out touring some of the locations that were very hard hit, and that required your mountain clothes and not your down at the Capitol kind of clothes. So my final comment that I wanted to make was about high-speed broadband services and cell phone services. Because I live and represent an area that doesn't have adequate cell phone towers to provide cell phone services, I am, I think, more acutely aware through my constituents' concerns about the fact that there are parts of Colorado, as all of you know very well, that simply, there's no way for somebody to call and say, I just stopped at an accident and I'm calling it in so that these people could get care quickly. And so I would certainly support and actually sponsored a bill in the last session that would have expanded the broadband, high-speed internet broadband services and cell phone services throughout Colorado to those unserved areas. The primary challenge, as I know you've heard many times before, is how do we pay for it? Because the private companies can't make enough money providing that service because there's not a large enough population to support a number of cell phone towers that it would take, particularly in the mountains, to provide that service everywhere. So it really is a question of, do the citizens in Colorado feel like they should pool their resources as a group of citizens to provide that service throughout the state? And of course, part of the argument is that most of us travel all over the state. If we don't, even if we do live in an area where you do have cell phone service, you may be easily traveling in an area where you don't, to go fishing or skiing or camping or whatever, and that it might be in everyone's best interest if we had that service, even though we know that it's going to be a hefty price tag. And then the next challenge, of course, is where does the money come from? And the big debate, as perhaps some of you followed in the legislature last year with the bill that I carried, was should it come from the high cost fund, which was, for some of you who are old enough in this room like me to remember it, was a service to provide phone services throughout Colorado. Some of us actually lived in areas where we didn't have private lines, we had party lines. And some people didn't have any lines at all. And so the idea was to pool some money by charging everyone on their phone bill a little bit of money, like 50 cents, 75 cents, and then putting all that money together and getting all the phone lines all over the state. And now we're thinking that that same high-cost fund could be used for cell phone towers, broadband services throughout the state. But that will be a hearty debate at the Capitol, and it could very well be that we may have to be creative and find some other sources of funding in order to provide that service, or that many people in my district, for example, won't have that kind of service. And with that, I would be happy to turn it over for questions, because it looks like my colleagues haven't arrived yet.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for lunch.
With regard to the broadband bill that you're talking about, I've read Viero's proposed legislation that they're going to introduce
Me too.
this session, and it does attempt to deregulate 911 from that, and so I've given them my thoughts on how they should change it, and I've never heard back from them. But in any event, you know, under the high cost fund for telephone, the PUC regulates what the charge is going to be. Under the Viero proposal, there's no regulation of what the charge is going to be. So you essentially have taxpayers paying for the service of putting in the broadband, and then you're not regulating what they can charge, which is different than the telephone. And so they can turn around and charge the taxpayers anything they want. So that just seems to me that that's not going to fly.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that.
That's not going to fly.
Thank you for coming. My name is Monica. I'm the manager of the Comm Center in Grand Junction, Colorado. And we have in our region some of the same concerns you were talking about, and some of our biggest debate as members of the PUC task force is exactly that. How are we going to move to this next generation of our technology and have the same level of service for Denver Metro folks as we do in the rural communities? And quite frankly, that's the biggest thing that is scaring the bejesus out of most of us. And really, I think for me, the legislation that has been proposed that is most daunting is all of this deregulation language. And I don't know if you can help educate me, maybe you can speak to where that's coming from. Is that mostly coming from the service providers because they want to have open season and pick and choose where they're shopping in their marketplace? And really, what is the legislature's position? Have they been really protective of that regulatory language that we need to keep in place?
The businesses would love to be deregulated. Some of the legislators support that position, and some of us do not. At this point, it looks like the majority of us do not think those services should be deregulated because we don't think that's good consumer protection. But the makeup of the legislature can change.
At the last deregulation bill, there were a lot of sponsors, there were a lot of co-sponsors on the bill, and it passed through its first committee, which I think was the Labor and Economic and Workforce Development Committee.
In the House, I think.
In the House, yes, I believe so. At the time, it seemed like it was almost unstoppable. And then
it got to the Senate.
And then, yes, then it got to the Senate, and then but when there's a strong momentum on a bill like that, what is the best thing that we can do as a community to educate the legislators as to what our concerns are so that they can take those into consideration?
Well, I like this piece that I found right outside the door. I think that's good advice. And I really think, the problem is that we don't hear the citizens' voices as much as we hear the industry voices sometimes at the Capitol. And some of us, like an old public health nurse, knows that right away. I mean, we get it. It's like, wait, these people may not represent the people that I represent at all. And so I never think in terms of, well, am I going to support this lobbyist perspective or that lobbyist perspective? That's just not the way I think. I always think about, let's see, is this good for the patient? Is this good for the people? Is this good for the citizens? Because that's my own filter. And so you help us to remind us that that's what our job is to work for you by coming and talking to us. And you don't have to go down to the Capitol if you don't want to, although I personally always love it when you come. And if you come to my committee, you will be most welcome to be there and to speak because there is plenty of opportunity in our committee meetings for us to have citizen input. And so that can be very powerful, to come and testify before the committee. And any of you are absolutely welcome to do that, and you're welcome to call me ahead of time to say, this makes me a little nervous, tell me how this works so I don't trip over my own feet or whatever, and I'll tell you kind of how, it does seem sort of intimidating and formal if you come down, but I do my best to make people feel at home at the Capitol. But there are other ways to communicate too. If you're, over in Grand Junction, or you're in some other part of the state where it's a long drive to get to the Capitol, it's very powerful for you to call us. It's perfectly appropriate to call the members of the committee, and it's very powerful to call or sit down and have a face-to-face conversation with your legislators from your own district. And they are supposed to pay attention to you. They're supposed to listen to you because that's who they work for. And all you need to do is say, this is who I am. My job is to provide a service that keeps our community safe and provides services quickly when people need help. And this particular bill, I think, might interfere with the way we keep people safe and provide services to them. And this is why. And they have to respect you because you have an expertise that they don't have in terms of all the phone calls that you receive and just the breadth of issues that you deal with in terms of emergencies and why interfering with that isn't a good idea. Plus, you live in the community as a citizen, not just as a professional 911 service person. And for that reason, you have every right to say, I think we should pay for this service, but I don't think that it should be some vague price tag that nobody knows what it really is. That's why the PUC is there, is to sort of manage that so that these costs don't get out of hand and don't end up just putting major dollars into the pockets of stockholders versus providing the service for the citizens themselves.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jackie Louise. I'm so glad you're here. The high cost fund, do you really think there might be any momentum for putting that back with telephone service, so to speak, broadband and cellular build out?
Yes, but I'm an eternal optimist, so it could be part of the problem. The argument against it is that there's not a nexus between your phone and the high-speed internet broadband services in a lot of people's minds. When I argue why we need these services, I argue it not just from the point of emergency services, but in rural areas, it's also an issue for telemedicine. It's an issue for a little kid doing their homework in some remote area of Colorado, and why shouldn't they have as much opportunity to get information as a kid in Denver? And I think that it's a small business benefit to have this service. So my perspective is actually I don't care where the money comes from. I just think we need to find the money, and maybe we'll get creative and find the money in 4 or 5 pockets and say, let's take some from our economic development budget for the state, because that would help small businesses in some of those areas. Let's take some of the money from our education funding, which of course we don't have a lot of, so that's part of the problem. But let's take a little bit from there, and let's take a little bit from maybe our healthcare budget, and combine that with the high cost fund money, and maybe that's how we get there. And I can see connections to all those areas, so from my filter, that would work.
Again, Senator, thank you very much for being here. I have been in this business here in Colorado for 16 years, and I want to say this is the first time that I've seen anyone off the hill at one of our meetings, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The question I'd like to ask, and unfortunately I come from Colorado Springs, so I think that right there may trigger off for you the next question I'm going to ask, but a couple of bills of great importance to the 911 community last session. One of them was yours that we were following, and of course another one. And emails and phone calls and everything but smoke signals to the Capitol, short of going down there personally. And what is the best method that you feel we should be using to communicate with our senators, our legislators? I like the email because I'm able to give you sort of a story that you can read at your pleasure and when you have time, because we know your schedules are very hectic. But is that the best mode of communication?
No. I think it depends on the legislator, but for me personally, it's not. I think there may be somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 emails in my email box right now, even though I do my best to try to stay on top of them, but I think it's more important for me to be here than it is sitting in my office in front of a computer all the time. So for me, a phone call works best. And if I need more in-depth information, what I like, to your point, is for you to say, Senator, I'm just calling you to let you know I'm worried about this. Here's how it's going to affect the citizens and their safety in the state, and I would like to give you more details about how we could change the bill to make it better, or some other suggestion you might have. I might say to you, great, and that sounds like a lot of details, so for that reason, I'm going to write your name down, and you're gonna send me an email, and then I'm gonna pull it up to the very top of the email stack, because you can imagine there are lots of emails in there that are absolutely useless. People's jokes, you know, I mean, things like that. And, but I'm gonna pull yours up to the top, and then I'm gonna read it, and then I'm gonna respond, because that works for me. I am not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And so I can't afford to pay out of pocket for me to have special extra staff. Some of the other senators do have staff year-round. I do not. I only have an aide for 40 hours a week, paid $10 an hour during the session. And so it's not like Congress, you know, we don't have 3 martini lunches and we don't have huge staffs that specialize in things. We have one person, and then some of the other senators pay extra staff to work for them year-round. So they may be fine because they have somebody who's filtering all their emails for them. So I think that's a long answer. The short answer is you need to find out just by asking your own representative or senator, what's the best way to contact you? Would you rather I called you, or would you rather I emailed you, or would you rather have a personal letter? I'll tell you what, a personal letter is so rare now that we're more likely to read it than almost anything else. It's so unusual to see them. But if you get 500 emails every day, they're not rare anymore. You know, so there's something very attractive about just a personal, from the heart letter. Doesn't have to be sophisticated at all. Just, you know, here's what I'm worried about. I'm hoping you're going to help me take care of these people.
Appreciate that. And just a final comment, I'm sorry I had to step out just for a minute, and I know that you had mentioned 911 and the high cost fund, but you also mentioned something that I think that maybe we as the 911 community have not done a good job of, is 911 is changing in the respect that it's no longer just going to be a person who's in need calling us. You know, we're going to become the old spoke in the wheel. And the telematics that you talked about, information from your alarm provider on your house and all of that, those things are all going to flow directly to us, and we're going to have to turn around and outbound those to other entities and agencies across the state. So I think that, you know, I'm not asking for preferential treatment for 911 in the high cost fund, but when we talk high cost fund going into broadband, we've got to include the 911 community.
Thank you. We will.
Thank you. Every year when that deregulation bill comes in, then we're playing defense and trying to fight it and say that, you know, exclude 911 from the deregulation. Do you think it would be useful to sponsor our own bill that just says the PUC shall have jurisdiction over 911 for any device that would call 911? So that we're more on the offensive and get support that way as a way to address the deregulation bill?
I think that's a good idea.
Will you sponsor it?
Yes.
And I do hear,
That one's easy.
I have heard that currently that there is a bill being written by the governor's office that's going to do just exactly that. I don't know whether, you know, we've seen Vayaros. I understand there's 6 different bills out there, and I know we haven't seen all of them yet. But I have heard that. It may be a rumor that the governor's office wants to write just a simple bill that says 911 from any device will be controlled by the PUC or governed by the PUC, and leave it at that, and hoping that that will solve our initial issue.
I think that's probably correct, and the way that works is that the governor's office then hands it to one of the state departments that's appropriate, probably the Department of Public Safety in this case, or the Department of Public Safety may have handed it to the governor to begin with, and then the legislative liaison for the Department of Public Safety shops for a sponsor in the Senate and the House. And I know that the Department of Public Safety liaison department just left me a message Friday, asking to meet with me to talk about some bills that they would like me to carry, so this could very well be the one that you're talking about.
I just had one more thing in the initial part of your conversation, you asked us about statewide standards. I happen to think that the technology is gonna force us in that direction, and the more rulemaking and legislation that we can get in place, and to the gentleman's point of us offering as an industry or as a profession that language for you to help us with that. The uniqueness of Colorado as we are in the rest of this country and how we manage our 911 system presents opportunities for us to be very different, but the technology is gonna force us to be very similar. And I think we'll have to have that kind of framework to be successful in offering those kinds of services equally to our citizens in the state.
You're all so sophisticated that you understand what those next technologies might be, but what would be helpful if you would give her back the microphone is if she would give me an example, because I really don't know. I don't live in your world. I just appreciate your world. So tell me an example, because I think that's easier to understand and it's easier for me to explain to my colleagues. Like, what's some technology that you see on the horizon that's going to require us to create some standards statewide in order to prevent chaos or God forbid, to prevent somebody from getting care when they should?
Well, some of these people in the audience are more qualified to answer that question for you than I am. I'm probably the least technologically savvy person in this entire room. But we can talk about, as something as simple for us as training standards. Now I'm talking about the operational management side of the house. But technology-wise, I know can somebody help me here? Bail me out, because I know we talk about baseline phone system and how we transmit phone data and the data that we'll be doing in IP network so that we can link all of our comm centers in this great big IP statewide, then links to the national level, whatever that infrastructure would look like. And it looks like nobody's gonna help me out here, but
Somebody's gonna help you.
And you may already have some of that, Senator, if you've been traveling out looking at the flooded area. But, we just had an event up in Larimer County, where Larimer County lost $1.5 million amount of our infrastructure for our 911 system. And that's gonna be difficult for them to, cash up to be able to replace that. But I think it goes back to what we've talked about, better rules, coming through the PUC on things like diversity. Local authorities, I've probably in the last 2 years have spent $2 to $3 million to diversify everything I can, because I'm fortunate enough to have the money to do that. But the minute it leaves my back door into the telephone community, if you will, they may not have that kind of diversity, but yet we're facing the responsibility of being able to receive that 911 call, but yet the citizen out there may not be able to make that 911 call. Another technological problem we have right now is everybody thinks that we don't worry about the landline telephones because we've got the cell network. We've had 2 major fires and enough flooding of our own down in Colorado Springs area, and all 3 events we had no cell service, or it was so poor that we couldn't use it. Public safety needs to have priority on those systems in order to be able to protect the public. So I think those are just a couple of things that come to mind today that are issues, not even looking very far, into the future.
One of the things I want to point out is that this is kind of a good role-playing exercise, because now you're trying to explain something complicated to someone who doesn't live in your world. And so practicing how you can explain it so there are no acronyms and nothing that, nothing that we wouldn't understand, because you don't want to lose us. And during the session, we work about 70 hours a week, and our conversations are never standing still like this. They are always walking if we are not already in a committee room or on the chamber floor. So if you do happen to catch it, it literally is like, well, just walk with me and we'll talk while I'm going to my committee meeting. So you have to get really good at saying, this is what I need you to work on in just very few words, and nothing that you think would make our eyes glaze over because we just are too stupid to understand your world, you know, kind of thing.
And to add on to what Jim and Monica were talking about, you know, as Larimer County lost that much infrastructure in our 911 system, there are counties in Colorado that would never be able to come up with that kind of money to replace anything. And so I think, to Monica's point of the technology that might make us have the need to be similar, is the fact that there needs to be in the state a way to work together so that everyone can have the same infrastructure. We watched with cellular 911 with phase 1 and phase 2, a very disparate thing happen where some counties were able to get caller location information while other smaller counties couldn't get that information. We've all pretty much on our way to catching up now, but it took, 15 years to get everybody kind of on the same playing level, and then we still have some that are not. And so the issue of how do you bring in all the new technology, meaning that telematics are changing, period, the telephone systems are changing. How do you bring it all in and have everybody on the same 911 service level?
That's what you were trying to get at.
That's exactly what I was trying to say.
What I thought you were gonna tell me was that these new cars have this system, because we were talking about it at lunch, and that's a new form of technology. And that's something you could explain to a legislator, is that, you know, some of the cars have this new technology that says, oh, my car just crashed. And could you send an ambulance and whatever, kind of thing. And you need to receive that call, and then you have to have mechanisms for sending that call out to, you know, the people that need to go help that person whose car just crashed, kind of thing. So there may need to be some sort of standard for how do you deal with this, because these cars could be, you know, not even a car that is a Colorado resident. I mean, it could be, who knows where this is from. So it's something that I could imagine is an example of high technology that's coming your way and is already, to a certain extent, something you're dealing with, that you might be dealing with differently depending on which area of the state you're in, and it might be better if it was standardized.
One thing I think of is, right now we have nationwide a rollout of text to 911, where people will be able to use text messages to directly send a text message to a 911 call center, and will route it just like it does a voice 911 call. We have one county right now in Colorado that has the ability to take those, and I know of one other that's working on it. And it's voluntary. So I think there are some counties that may not want it at any time period. So, you know, when we talk about standardization, how does that come into play when it intersects with the local control issue? You know, if we have some counties that take text eventually and some counties that don't, you know, at what point does it become an issue where standardization becomes more important than local control?
For me, it would be at a point where I was convinced that you were jeopardizing the safety of the public if you didn't standardize it. But if it's just one way of communicating and there are other ways of communicating that they could have communicated, then maybe it doesn't jeopardize the safety. But I don't know what anybody else would, you know, consider in making a decision about whether that needed to be standardized or not. And having been a county commissioner, of course, I would want to talk to my former county commissioner colleagues too and say, you know, how do you think this affects you directly in your community? Is it a financial burden that's unmanageable for you? And can you put in place some sort of a plan that teaches your citizens how to communicate with you in emergencies? What do you do about your tourists who might not know what the uniqueness is of your community? And, you know, we just have to have that conversation and see what comes out the other end. But it seems to me that that's where you guys are struggling and where we will too, is just to try to figure out, how do we get in front of the technologies? What part of that needs to be PUC oriented, just rules and regs, and what part really has to be in statute?
Thank you very much. I had one more question. Earlier you were talking about possible use of the high-cost fund for building out cell service coverage areas, and supplementing cell service coverage area. Is there legislation drafted for that, or is it just an idea at this stage?
There are apparently several bills that are out there floating around, and they are either coming from the departments, or they're coming from the Arrow, or they're coming from some of the other business interests, and I have only seen one of them. And I don't know what the others look like. If a legislator chooses to, they can keep their bill a secret until it is formally introduced. And so there is no way that you can actually see it unless people are, like me, are blabbermouths that just like to talk about everything and just say, let's just all of us talk about this and figure it out. But if you like to keep it a secret because you want to take credit for it or whatever, then I don't know. So the short answer is I don't know, and I think the reason is because those bills won't be available for me to look at right away. We're supposed to file our pre-file bills December 3rd, and there are all these rules and deadlines and that kind of thing. And then we have up to 5 bills that we can carry during the session, unless they're a department bill, but if they're a department bill, that doesn't count. So, it gets a little complicated. These bills can be introduced at different times during the session. They wouldn't necessarily come to local government committee. They might be assigned to Business, Labor, and Technology Committee, some other committee. And so I might not see some of these bills until they're actually on the floor.
Any other questions or comments for the senator? We do have some people on the conference phone today. Does anybody on the conference phone have any questions for the senator? Okay. Hearing
Thank
none,
you.
I want to thank you very, very much.
You are most welcome.
This is going to be an annual event, but you will always be the first legislator to speak to 911 Goes to Denver.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for doing the work of 3 legislators. You carried it all by yourself. You're welcome to stay, or we know you're busy, so if you have to leave, we'll understand that too. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Well, that was great, wasn't it? It was very informative. And there goes the microphone again. I break these things and I have to owe Jefferson County for a new one. One of the things I like too, we had a lower turnout, but
Can you send us her contact information so we can thank her for coming?
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That'd be great. Personal letters.
Yes. Well, and that kind of goes into my next thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Resource Center has been doing to improve legislative communication between 911 professionals and the state legislature, and what we plan to be doing in the future. If the senator had stayed here, she could probably give me some feedback on whether she thinks these are good ideas or not. But we have a number of different things that we want to do to try to help improve communication between the local 911 authorities, the local 911 professionals, and the state legislature, as well as at the federal level as well. The Resource Center has, as a nonprofit, we can take a stance on specific issues, but we have traditionally remained neutral on legislation, mainly because we want to remain in that information clearinghouse, sort of information source kind of role. But there are things that we can do to facilitate collaboration, which is one of the things that's in our mission. So one of the first things I want to do, and I put it on here as a link, but you can, whoops, as long as you click the link and not go backward on the page. If you've never been there, the Resource Center website has a legislation and regulation page, And it's probably a little bit hard to see right now on that screen, but if you go down through here, you see existing legislation regulation. It gives you links to how to look up that information. It has all of the bills that we tracked during the 2013 session. As soon as the 2014 session starts, we'll be clearing all that off and starting over. So you can always look there to see if there are any bills that we're tracking. If you find out about a bill that I don't know about yet, or there's a bill that maybe I saw and didn't see the 911 ramifications of it yet, but you think there may be 911 ramifications, please let me know and I'll make sure to get it on there. And then I keep track of regulatory issues as well. Right now, we're not tracking anything at the federal level, but we have these items that we're tracking at the PUC. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. That's sort of the oldest thing that we have. That's as far as legislation and regulation go, to try to keep you all informed as to what's going on. Let me click this so that we don't have that in the way. There we go. Of course, we facilitate meetings of the 911 Task Force. We also manage the listserv for the 911 Task Force. But we facilitate meetings of the Task Force Legislative Subcommittee. Is Mary Jane here? So Mary Jane is the chair of the Legislative Subcommittee of the 911 Task Force, I believe. Are you still?
I was last year by default because nobody else stepped up, so.
Well, guess what? It means you are again.
I do want to participate.
Oh.
Honestly, I'm not sure that I will continue to be the chair
Okay.
because I don't know that I have the time for it,
Mhm.
but I will be involved.
Well, especially, and what for those on the phone who couldn't hear, what Mary Jane was saying is she would want to participate, but she wasn't sure if she was going to continue to chair due to time issues. If we are talking about drafting legislation as a 911 community, we're going to need that sort of collaboration. So I imagine that subcommittee will be getting a lot of extra work again. But one of the newer things that we've started doing is managing a listserv for the legislative contacts of each 911 authority. A while back, I sent an email out to what I had listed as the primary contact for every 911 authority in the state and said, who do you want to be your legislative contact? This would be a person that we will notify of any legislation or regulation that gets introduced that you need to be aware of, but it will also be the person that we will give contact information to state legislators for 911 authorities in their area. That's the person whose contact information will be included. If they gave me somebody's name, that's who I put on there. If they didn't respond, then I put that primary contact on there so that every 911 authority in the state has a legislative contact. So I want people to be aware of that. And I have a list of those contacts right here that I'm going to pass around so you can look and see who the legislative contact is for your 911 authority. And if it is not correct, please let me know. And so I put together a listserv of those legislative contacts. So now, anytime a new piece of legislation comes out, new piece of regulation, we can put it out over that listserv and notify everybody at the same time, every 911 authority in the state. But more importantly, you as the legislative, if you're on that listserv as a legislative contact for your 911 authority, you can communicate with everyone else. Anybody on that listserv can post so that you can all communicate together and collaborate. One of the issues that we found last year, one of the complaints that people had concerning the deregulation bill that came up in 2013 was that it was very difficult to coordinate a response from the 911 community. And of course, you're all your own people, you're all your own organizations. So you may not agree on everything, but if part of the problem is just not being able to communicate, then this will be one way that you can maybe overcome those issues. Obviously, 911 Goes to Denver event. Hey, check it out, we're here. Legislative outreach brochures. I'm going to pass these around. Now, first of all, there was a brochure that you saw out there on the table. That one is geared towards 911 authorities. So for those of you who are here, obviously you get yours today, but I'll also be distributing those to 911 authorities around the state. It's just information about how to contact and work with the legislature. So that's one direction. The other direction is contacting the legislators and letting them know how they can reach out to us if they have questions on a piece of legislation. If something comes across their desk, hopefully these brochures will help make them consider the 911 issues, and if they aren't sure how it would affect 911, they'll have a list of people to call. So these are just samples. I'm going to just give you a couple of them, and we can do a couple here. These are samples from different districts
Thank you.
You're welcome. These are samples from different districts. We have a couple here and one here. And if you just pass them around, the idea is to have a basic cover letter telling them why 911 is important as far as their constituents are concerned. Obviously, you know, we in the industry think, well, of course 911 is important. We don't always seem to realize, or don't always realize maybe, that we are competing with a lot of other things that are also very important to the constituents of the legislators. So there's a cover letter in there, and I would appreciate feedback on that cover letter. If you see anything in there that you think should be worded differently, I would appreciate that. There's a brochure in there telling them about some of the issues facing 911 without taking a particular stance on any issue. It just talks about some of the challenges. So there's it kind of gives them an overview of what types of issues they may encounter in legislation that comes across their committees. And then there's a list, and it's going to be customized for every district. So they will only see the list for their district, showing every 911 authority that is in their district and the legislative contact person with email and phone number for that 911 authority. And what the cover letter says is it encourages them to call that person if they have questions about a piece of legislation, about how it might affect 911. So it'll be very important for us to stay on top of that and talk about it as soon as it becomes available, so that when these legislators start calling their local 911 authority legislative contacts, then they'll already have an idea of what the legislation is about and will be able to talk to them about it. So it's kind of a dual-pronged approach. We're going to be talking to the 911 authorities and encouraging them to become more active, to use the legislative contact listserv that we've created, to be involved in discussions, to work on the legislative subcommittee. But at the same time, we're going to be contacting the legislators and encouraging them to make use of the local 911 authority in their district as a resource. Now again, these are samples. The folders will be nicer, and the print quality on the brochure will be nicer. This is just for demonstration purposes today. My goal is to have these out to every legislator before the session starts, so we'll be working on that. Does anybody have any questions before I talk about any of the other things on here? Joe, did you have a question? Okay.
Okay.
What do you guys think? Do you think this is a useful endeavor? Do you think it's a good idea having them call the local 911 authorities?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, this is great.
I think, because the Resource Center stays neutral on most legislative issues, I think there was concern about trying to do something that would make it look like we're setting up the Resource Center to be the people to call if they have a question about a piece of legislation. By having them call the local 911 authorities, it keeps you guys involved, and it gives you the ability to say what you think about the bill. Hopefully there's some consensus in the 911 community on a particular piece of legislation. There usually is, but that way it keeps it local. Let's see, what else did I have over here? Oh, along with those brochures to the 911 authorities, we're also going to have I'm going to have similar lists. They're very similar to what are in the folders that I'm going to give to legislators, except instead of a list of 911 authorities by district, it's a list of districts by 911 authority. So that every 911 authority will have a list of all of their current representatives and senators, including U.S. House representatives, and their contact information.
Oh, very cool.
And these are in alphabetical order. I'm going to start it here and pass it around.
Or the G's, and we can just take ours now?
You can just take yours now, and if you take yours now, I won't mail it to you later. So you'll save me some postage.
Perfect.
Or you'll save the Resource Center some postage. So that's kind of the dual-pronged approach. And I've got it set up in a database so that when the next election comes, all I have to do is type in the new names of anybody who's left office and been replaced, and reprint these, and they can go out again. So it's It's meant to be an ongoing, maintainable thing. Boy, that didn't take nearly as long as I thought it would. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Is there anything else that we can do to help improve legislative contact?
This, is your total list available on the website for members? So if I wanted to look at a particular county or a particular place, could I go on there and find out what you're passing out to the authority boards?
It is not, but it's all public information, so I don't see why not. I can put that on the website. It'll be a long list. It'll be a long document, but I'll put it up there and I'll send a link out to everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? We have about 35 people register for this today, since we're still talking about legislative outreach. And, counting in here, I think we got about 30 people, maybe total. What can we do to help improve participation in the 911 community for these events? Was it the construction that scared people away today, or do we need to do more? When I say we, I mean me. Do I need to do more